hosted, so thank you.
Oh, thank you and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. And while we're doing this transition from the morning into adult ed, I am going to go ahead and share my screen for a sort of transition activity. So for those of you who are staying, I'm going to put up a question in the slides. And you can go ahead and either put that answer in the chat or just think about it in your own mind. But the question is, what is one piece of theater, art, music, film, visual art, a piece of art that you've experienced that has changed the way that you see the world? And then we'll just give a minute or two for the transition, and then Joanne and I will get started. So I think we'll give just another minute to allow people who are still arriving to arrive and transition. And if you have just joined us in the chat, feel free to please enter an idea of a piece of art, whether that's theater, music, visual art, dance, a performance piece, something that you've experienced in your life that has changed the way that you see the world. So I'm seeing in the chat a number of theater pieces. I saw West Side Story, I put in Cabaret. Some people shared Harry Potter books. Someone, Karen, was lucky enough to see James Baldwin speak. We've had a lot of literature, live performance. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing for the moment and invite Joanne just to say hello and introduce herself, and then we'll get started. So Joanne, can you go ahead and say hi?
Yep, good morning. My name is Joanne. I work at Imagination Stage.
Mute. You're on mute.
That was my fault. I'm sorry. I just muted Joanne when I was trying to mute myself. Sorry about that.
That's okay. My name's Joanne. I work at Imagination Stage. I know I'm local to all of you, but for those who are not familiar with Imagination Stage, we're a theater for young audiences. in Bethesda. And what that means is we do professional shows for children. So the actors are professional actors, if they're professionally designed, but they're all shows that explore a child's point of view, and they really are developed for young people. We also are an arts education center and have a variety of after-school programming. And then I'll be speaking later about our Theater for Change programs. But I'm really excited, and thank you for inviting us. And we have a lively and interactive session for today.
Thank you, Joanne. And again, I'm Sarah Zatz. I am actually zooming in from Jackson Heights, Queens, where I live in New York. It is snowing here as well. And I am the Associate Director of Ping Chong and Company here in New York City. And I'll share a little bit more about the company later when I present, but I'm really happy to be here. And Karen is clarifying that it was Howie, not Karen, who got to see James Baldwin speak as a teenager, which I'm love to hear that story someday, Howie. So for today, what we have is a sort of interactive presentation. Joanne and I are both going to speak a little bit about the work we do in Theater for Social Change, working with community members. And we're going to invite all of you to participate in some of the activities that we do when we work with community members. And don't panic, no one's going to have to act, sing, or perform. It's really about gathering memories, sharing stories, and making connections with your community members. And one of the things that both Joanne and I do in our practice with community members is to use community agreements or community guidelines to kind of shape our space and make sure that everyone feels as safe and comfortable as possible. So I'm going to share my screen again and just share a few guidelines. We're only together for an hour, so most of this is really just in the spirit of how we work together more than how it will apply to our work today. But again, it's part of the practice that I do, and it's part of the practice that Joanne does. So sharing my screen again. So for those of you who may not be familiar with community agreements are really designed to kind of make the space more comfortable, make people feel safe and protected as much as possible, and to kind of create a spirit of openness and collaboration. So I and Joanne and all of you are used to doing this in person and live. Joanne and I were supposed to do this session with you about a year ago in March before everything shut down for COVID. So here we are almost a year later. Zoom Life has brought us a few new community agreements. So one of them is one screen, which means it's so tempting when you're sitting in your kitchen table, no one can really see you, texting under the table or like watching the Super Bowl in the background. So if you could, for our hour together, be as present as possible, one screen in front of you. And if you need to check out and take care of yourself, of course, we understand. And as we all try to do, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Please unmute yourself when you are speaking. Even a year into it, I'm still having trouble with it. I'm sure you are too. Make space, take space just means if you're someone who tends to talk a lot, maybe step back a little bit, let someone else speak. If you're someone who tends to lurk in the background and not share, maybe challenge yourself to step forward a little bit. Allow others to identify themselves and speak from lived experience. We're all here as part of a Jewish community, but of course, everyone experiences, for example, their Jewish identity differently. So not assuming that just because we may share identity, that all of our experiences are the same. Intent does not equal impact is just a way to attend to harm if it should happen. You know, everyone's coming into this with the best of intentions, but we do inadvertently create harm. We carry our biases with us. So, you know, if something happens and you inadvertently hurt someone's feelings or say something that is harmful, just to be mindful that even if it wasn't your intention, that the impact is there, whether you intended it or not. And then the last one, stories stay, lessons leave. So if we hear something today that's really exciting, that's really meaningful, this James Baldwin story that I'm excited about, I'm not going to go and put that on Facebook. I'm going to ask Howie for consent before I share it. But I might say to someone, hey, I participated in this event and I heard some really meaningful stories. So just the idea that what we learn here today, feel free to share that out. If you're hearing someone's specific personal story, make sure that you're asking for consent before you put it out there. So those are just some guidelines. They vary based on the work that we're doing, the communities they're working with. It's just a sampling of how we do some work. But I would love to ask everyone to kind of give an agreement for that, for our short time together today. And I can't see everyone all at once right now, but if we could get like a thumbs up or a reaction or something that indicates our consent for that, that would be fantastic. Great, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up and little reactions. Thank you so much. And let's see, with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Joanne to introduce us a little bit more to the work that she's doing at Imagination Stage. And Joanne, do you want me to keep sharing the screen from the beginning?
That would actually be really great. Thank
Okay,
you, Sarah.
great.
So
I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Joanne.
Perfect. So I'm going to share a little bit about what Theater for Change means to Imagination Stage. I think a lot of theaters use that terminology, but it's different for every theater. So for us, I'm going to just read you our Theater for Change statement. Imagination Stage remains dedicated to innovation and growing the ways in which we reach young people and families as we strive to serve all young people. Using theater productions and educational workshops to bridge cultural divides and lift up underrepresented voices, Imagination Stage's Theater for Change program explores complex social justice issues to help build a new generation of compassionate, collaborative children who are capable of changing the world. So we have 3 programs that fall under Theater for Change, but our flagship program and what really started our Theater for Change programming is called Óyeme, which means hear me in Spanish. And I think rather than me telling you about it, I think it's better to see a little bit of examples from the program. So with that, we'll play the video.
Great. I'm going to play this video. You should be able to hear it, but if you can't, someone let me know and we'll fix it.
Óyeme is a multifaceted program serving young people who have recently fled violence. Óyeme is a multifaceted program serving young people who have recently fled violence in Central America and arrived in the Washington, D.C. region, the second largest area of resettlement in our country.
Often when, especially with children and young people, when they've been exposed to very traumatic events, they lose their voice. And so what Óyeme does is nurtures them and provides that space for them to regain their voice, to tell their story in a way that helps to uplift their resiliency and not necessarily focus just on all the wrong things that have happened to them.
Óyeme provides a voice. Otherwise, they would be living in silence, just trying to fit in. This provides an opportunity for people to feel that empathy, to go on that journey with them.
Tell her I can stay. Laura, tú sabes, tu mami. Tell her I'll leave the tías and I'll come here and live with you. No puedo, mija. I can't protect you. I can't. Oh, you don't need to.
The Óyeme program and the art that comes from it it's vital in that we are trying to open eyes and hearts and minds and make a connection so that you can actually see and hear from these refugees, from immigrants, and build the empathy and the understanding and the knowledge you need to make decisions.
Working with our network of partners, Imagination Stage offers theater-based, trauma-informed workshops, a touring production of an original play based on the experiences of our students, training opportunities for teachers, educational resources, and more.
I see you. I hear you. You'll get me there. Hear me now. Óyeme. This day is mine. I'll find my way.
Great. So that gives an overview of the program. And I think, as you can tell, it's both educational workshops and a professional show. We started the program in 2014, and it is really a collaboration between Hispanic Heritage Foundation and Health and Human Services of Montgomery County. The play toured for about 3 years, and while the main audience is young people, middle and high school students, we also toured it to Capitol Hill in partnership with Chris Van Hollen's office, as well as had a lot of community performances really geared more towards nonprofit leaders, folks curious about immigration rights, and partnered with the faith-based community, including Lutheran immigrant and refugee services. So the goal really is both advocacy and education. And we're excited because Miriam, the playwright, is actually going to create a second piece around Óyeme, because we've sort of reached our limit and the play is a little bit out of date at this point. So we're really looking forward to doing a second piece. But the process in which we work is really working with young people and getting their input and their voices on a variety of subject matters through educational workshops, and then creating a piece so that the reach is wider, but also their voices are heard on a variety of subject matters. So the next program I'm going to share about is our Youth and Police Partnership Project. This came about because our partner with OIMA, Health and Human Services, really wanted to see more positive relationships between officers in the community. So introduced us, we started in Montgomery County. We now work more in DC with this program, but introduced us to the chief of police, and we partnered with the Montgomery County Recreation Department alongside the Montgomery County Police to pilot the workshop. We actually now work with the Metropolitan Police Department's Youth and Family Services Division alongside DC Public Schools. So this program, officers and youth work collaboratively. So we kind of fit into existing program that the officers are doing with youth. So they have a variety of outreach programs that they do. We come in and at that point, the officers and the youth are creating theater together. So they're on even playing field. So we'll start with improv. We'll do a lot of writing prompts and conversations, and then it'll lead into devising or creating a piece that appeals to everybody who's in the group. And so by the end of the week, the officers and the youth perform together. So there's a lot of nerves at the end of the week, but we'll do a lot of post-show evaluation with the participants. And a lot of times there'll be a lot of surprise at how quickly they were able to create something as a team. A lot of times they're surprised that they were able to find something in common. That's usually from the young people in common with the officers. A lot of times the officers are surprised by the maturity of the young people, by how much they had to take a risk to perform on stage. So it's really about building relationships, but also really listening to each other to get to that point. And we do, very similar to the way we worked with OIMA, we do have a professional theater piece that's come out of the workshops that tours as well as a point for discussion and for advocacy. And the last program, which falls under our Theater for Change programming, is a partnership we do with the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. So this is primarily with young men who are incarcerated, ages 16 to 21. It's a newer program, and the focus, again, is really on lifting up their thoughts and their voices with an end goal of the young people themselves getting to perform. So rather than bringing in a professional playwright and having professional actors perform, the young people themselves are the performers. And I'm just going to share just this one sample. We do a lot of poetry in this program. So I'll just share this one poem that came out of the process. When I get home, I'm getting to the things I missed, like hug my mother, dap my brother, and kiss my sis, hug and kiss my girl who've been holding down on her own. I'm trying to elevate, motivate, and concentrate when I get home. One wrong move landed me in this situation. And when the young people perform, we often will have some peers in the facility, but also staff from the facility, but as well as we've had judges attend, county council members attend, social workers. So I think the benefit is that the young people themselves are controlling their own narrative. They're getting to be seen in a light that they want to be seen in. It's also a great project management skill, and the poetry has what you're just seeing one poem. Normally we'll take all of the poems together and kind of craft one well-rounded theater piece. So it's quite an experience.
Thank you, Joanne. And we'll be, like I said, we'll be getting to, after the next section where I'm going to share a little bit about the work of Ping Chong and Company, Joanne and I together are going to lead you through some of the kinds of activities that both of our organizations do in working with community members to generate and share these memories and stories in a public setting. And then also we have Firdaus Dekhan joining us for the Q&A, who's joined us. Hi, Firdaus, who is a participant in one of Ping Chong and Company's pieces, which you'll see a little bit more about in a minute. So Firdaus is also here to answer any questions you might have about what it is like as a community member to share your stories in this way. And I'm gonna go ahead and continue on and share a little bit more. Oh, wrong slide. Where's my Ping Chong and Company slide? There it is. My slides are out of order. Still on a learning curve. I'm going to share a little bit about Ping Chong and Company, the work that I do in New York City and also around the country. We have had a chance to present some of our work in Bethesda and the DC area. Ping Chong and Company is founded in New York City by Ping Chong, who is one of our leading theatrical innovators, National Medal of Arts recipient, and the company has created over 100 works for the stage. Today, we are primarily centered around collaboration, community engagement, and engaging multi-generational and interdisciplinary artists to build on Ping's legacy of work for approaching 50 years. In 2022, we'll be celebrating Ping's 50th anniversary as an artist. We are based in New York City, but we also work and create projects nationally, creating theater that illuminates intersections of race, identity, history, culture, and bringing a multiplicity of voices to the stage. My title at Ping Chong and Company is Associate Director, which mostly means I wear a lot of different hats, but the primary project that I lead and is where my heart is called the Undesirable Elements Project, which is an interview-based theater series exploring issues of culture and identity in the lives of individuals who are living in different communities. We make these projects around the United States. We work with local community organizations and arts presenters to invite in participants to share their own stories on stage. We put out a call for local individuals who are interested in telling their stories. They are typically not actors. They may not have any performing experience whatsoever. They join the interview and residency project and then become the final performers telling their own stories. And the development process can take about a year from sort of the first concept into the final presentation. We have made over 60 presentations or projects in this series. They include productions focused on living with a disability, the experiences of Congolese refugees in Syracuse, New York, experiences of survivors of sexual violence, a project with Black trans youth in New Orleans, young Muslim Americans in New York City, and individuals living with chronic illness in Portland, Oregon. Excuse me. The script is constructed and edited out of the interviews that we do with the cast members, usually by myself and a secondary artistic collaborator, often local to the community. And the text is not necessarily verbatim, but is adapted and theatricalized. However, the key is that the cast members themselves have final agency and sign off on the script. So we do write the script out of the interviews, but the cast members then have the opportunity to review it, make requests for edits, change it, and bring their own voices into it. And the cast members are always paid for their work as professional performers. They are always credited as collaborators in the text. And like I said, they have final approval. And our guiding principles in making this work is sort of rooted in the idea that we believe everyone has a story to tell, everyone's story is worth listening to, and that this is particularly essential for communities that are not often able to see themselves represented authentically on stage or in mainstream media. And we try to recognize the power and artistry that is always already present in the communities that we partner with. So we try to stay away from the framing of giving voice to, and really focus on the idea of creating space for, recognizing and honoring the urgency of these stories, which are and always have been out there, but haven't always been heard. And I'm going to share a short clip from a documentary about the making of our piece about Muslim identity, which is a piece that was shared in the DC area. So some folks may have had the chance to see it. My slides are out of order, so yes, that's the right one. And like I said, Firdaus, who's featured in this piece, is here with us and will join us later for Q&A if you have any specific questions for Firdaus. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and from there we'll move into some group activities. This is about a 3-minute video.
My name is Firdaus Dekhan. I'm originally from Afghanistan. I came here almost 2 years ago. And the first time I saw that in campus, I was like, oh, I need to get more information about that. I thought that at a time when Islamophobia is increasing and arising, so it's good to join to this program and give a different image or picture from Muslims.
Hi, Firdaus.
How's it going?
All the media is about just they're trying to portray that when it comes to Muslims and Muslim culture, they talk about terrorism, and Muslims are terrorists, about violence, but I'm talking about this, that to express the facts about Muslims, that not all Muslims are terrorists.
Terrorists, go back to your country. I have always felt American. I was born here. But now I feel like I have to act more American. I think it's difficult because you want to do what the religion requires you to do and you want to follow the religion and be good. But I feel like people want to judge more when you wear a hijab. People would see me going to one car and they would like dash out of the car.
After 9/11, it all of a sudden becomes that my faith is the end-all be-all of my identity. It's the only thing that I am, and it is these things that have been portrayed in the media.
White people say to me,
"Oh, you're a nice Muslim. You make Muslims look like good people."
what the fuck do you mean we make Muslims look good? We're just people, like anybody else.
All of a sudden, on September 12th, 2001, everyone already knows. They know why I'm here. They know what I'm supposed to look like and what I'm supposed to do and how American I really am.
An FBI study found that 94% of all terrorist attacks in the U.S. were committed by non-Muslims.
It's like it's our job to make people feel like we are safe Muslims.
Assimilated.
So every time you do a 10 clap, watch each other so you're together. And so right from the start, when you say Maha starts with let's get started, it has to be welcoming. It has to have energy.
He is awesome, and he turns us into performers. It's incredible.
There's a rhythm to it. You want to keep the rhythm going through it.
1947.
1947.
1947.
1947.
1947.
1947.
Right.
My favorite part of the rehearsal is definitely when we get to warm up together. You can see like how everyone has such a strong personality.
Just the sense of rhythm and pace.
This piece allowed me to really be more comfortable with who I am and accepting myself and not putting myself in any one particular box.
I'm really ready to perform and let people know what being Muslim in America is really like.
Class differences stare me in the face. My father's struggling.
I think they're just really happy to be able to do this. I can see it, I can see that it matters to them.
So that piece, Beyond Sacred, we were able to tour that piece around to 11 states and Washington, D.C. And so it's been seen now by, I think, over 10,000 people. So that is one of our projects that's really had a significant reach nationally. And then a lot of these projects really are very locally specific and may be developed with a theater, but then afterwards go on to schools, churches, community centers. And so they can really be really local, or they can really have a very significant national reach. And a lot of it just depends on when we started Beyond Sacred, it was 2015, it was before even the 2016 election. And then, as soon as Trump came in and the Muslim ban happened and people in theaters and communities were seeking for ways to have these conversations, and having a piece of theater or art where you can hear people's real lived experiences on stage can really open that space for dialogue that can be a lot harder to have, as we all know, having lived through the last 5 years, it can be a lot harder to have when you're just, getting your information from television or from social media. So with that, and we are going to leave room for questions at the end. So I'm sure that there's a lot coming up out of these two sets of programs that Joanne and I have shared. But with that, we want to invite you into some of the process and experience that we have offered as we make these works and as we build this work. And so we're going to invite now all of you to share. And I am going to stop sharing my screen in a minute so we can see each other a little bit better. But Joanne and I are going to invite you into an activity that is a well-known theater education activity called Big Wind Blows. Again, in a regular non-pandemic times, this is usually done in a room where everyone's together and we can move and we can cross a circle and we can step forward and we can step back. We can't do that. So as all theaters have been adapting, and I hope to never hear the word pivot again, but we've all been pivoting to do this work online. And so the way this works is I'm going to read a series of statements. And if that statement applies to you, you're going to either raise your hand or put a thumbs up or a reaction emoji in your screen to let us know that it applies to you. So for example, if I said, I'm wearing glasses, then you would give a thumbs up if you happen to be wearing glasses. Now, if you wear contacts and sometimes you wear glasses and sometimes you don't, and you don't know whether or not you should put your thumb up, that is entirely up to you. You're wearing glasses today, you might not be wearing glasses tomorrow. Make the choice that feels right for you for right now. So I'm going to stop my screen so we can see each other a little bit better. And I'm gonna go ahead and read this series of statements. And again, if it applies to you, thumbs up, emoji, whatever works for you. So I currently live in Montgomery County. Great, that looks like about half of our folks here. I grew up in Montgomery County. I live in another part of the DC area, Maryland, Virginia, DC. Okay. I am an immigrant. Great. Can we, if you're comfortable, those of you who raise your hand, if you want to unmute yourself and shout out some of the places that folks have immigrated from or put it in the chat.
From South Korea.
Russia.
Afghanistan, the video talked about.
Great, thank you. One or both of my parents were or are immigrants. One or more of my grandparents were immigrants. Okay, that's almost everyone, I think. I think of myself as a spiritual or religious person. I identify as Jewish. I came to Judaism later in my life, or I converted. I sometimes struggle with my Jewish identity. Switching gears slightly. My life has changed a lot in this last year during the pandemic. Less has changed in my life than I expected in this last year during the pandemic. I have tried a new hobby or learned a new skill during the pandemic. And if you're comfortable, I'd love for folks to unmute yourselves and just shout out, what are some of the hobbies or skills we've practiced or learned during the pandemic?
Making masks.
Making masks.
Yoga.
Yoga.
Distance running.
Distance running, great.
And writing.
Writing.
Cooking.
Great.
Reading.
Great.
Wood carving.
Wood carving. Great, thank you. I have felt lonely or isolated during the pandemic. I have made or renewed connections, new connections, or renewed old connections during the pandemic. Great, that's almost everyone. That's one of, I think, the unexpected positives that we've seen. I have participated in a political demonstration, either in person or virtually, since last May. Switching gears slightly again. I believe in second chances. I have laughed at myself at least once in the last week. Great. I have been able to hug someone in the last week. Good. I have shoveled snow in the last week, or maybe I'm going to shovel snow today. This is an excellent part of living in an apartment building in New York City. No snow shoveling. Great. And then I would like to invite folks in the Zoom room, if you have an offering you would want to share, a prompt that we could answer as a group, if you want to unmute yourselves and offer one. My favorite bonus one is, I am left-handed. Lefties, unite. Only a few. Does anyone else have an offering?
I've got one. My life has gotten simpler because of the pandemic.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any others?
In a similar vein, I'd say I can feel happiness with a very simple things, such as just eating outside in the restaurant.
Yes.
I've put some new foods.
Trying some new foods. Great. Thank you, everyone. Maybe one last one?
I offer, my life has gotten tougher since the pandemic. Anyone else?
Yeah, and it's both and, right?
Yeah.
And Karen and Howie, I saw you leaning in there, so let's take yours for the last one.
Can I have a question? I have a question to Jake. Jake, you said your life is simpler. Can you explain? Simpler, less parameters, or simpler in what? Because the word simpler includes too much meaning inside.
Sure. Well, I don't go anywhere, so I don't drive anywhere. My office is in my bedroom, and I don't have as much. We don't have as much going on. We're not taking the kids all over town. It's just gotten less complicated. That's what I would say.
Easier to conduct.
Yeah.
Easier. All right. Okay, I agree. Same here.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And then Karen and Howie, did you have one last offering?
I found new ways to help other people in both professionally, but mostly personally.
Beautiful. Yeah, finding new ways to help others during the pandemic.
Certainly, Marlene.
Great. Thank you for that. This is an activity that we often do kind of on our first day of gathering with folks, because it allows ways of making sometimes unexpected connections. You can see kind of what we all have in common and ways of maybe stepping forward and expressing some levels of difference, but at relatively low stakes. And so there's always ways to invite people into this space. And we kind of move these questions through ideas of like place, belonging, and identity. Looking at where we were born or raised or where our families came from, kind of current events and things that we may be engaging with, and then sort of value systems like I believe in second chances, or I didn't put it on here, but sometimes we use I believe in love, I believe in fate. And this is just a way of inviting people in as an icebreaker, really, as a getting to know you. And then some of these prompts can go on to become writing exercises or memories or things that you explore a little bit more deeply. And with that in mind, I'm actually going to go ahead and go back to Joanne for another gathering and sharing activity, and then we'll be opening up for Q&A.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So you shared a little something about yourselves in a low-risk way. And so now we're going to do a little bit more sharing, but this time, this is an activity I especially like to do with Zoom with young people, because in doing a lot of teaching over Zoom, it's hard sometimes to get cameras on. And this is a great way to do that, but also a great way to learn something about where somebody is and a little something about them. So with that, I'm going to ask you to find something in the space that you're working in that is soft. So stay in the same room that you're in, but find an object that's soft. And I'm going to set my timer for just 1 minute. And once you have it, you can hold it up to the camera. Oh, I see some really clever interpretations, especially from, looks like Katie and Sanaan. I really love that. Okay, great. I see a few pets. Fantastic. Wonderful. Pillow. Looks like a yarn. Fantastic. Wonderful. We didn't need, a kitty cat. Great. And it looks like this group might not have needed the full minute for something soft. So we're going to move on. And you can let your something soft go unless you're snuggling it. And this time I'm going to ask, and I'll give you a full minute, to find something in your space that makes you smile and bring it to the camera, starting now. And I'll give a full minute. Something that makes you smile. I see some pictures. For some people, what was soft might also make them smile. Some pets. The comics. Great. Oh, some beautiful photos. And if you already have your object on the screen, if you would like to type into the chat what you chose that makes you smile, in some cases it's a live family member I see, go ahead and put in the chat what you chose that makes you smile. So if you can type it in the chat, and if you want to say what about that makes you smile. Pet dog, great. The dog smiles. Sarah and Adam's wedding picture, a happy day. So a memory. Our kids and Baba Fett, yeah, family. Great. Anybody else wants to add into the chat something they found that makes them smile? Picture of the first time we saw and held our new granddaughter, born in New York during COVID. Oh, that's fantastic. Congratulations. Great. Photo from family and friends. I found happiness from much simple things and feel the joy. Elder kitty. Yes, a lot of times family. I think pets are included in that. Adoption family profile book. Drawings of all the pets that have lived in my house that our kids commissioned for our 50th anniversary. It's lovely. So you can keep adding to the chat, but I have one last one. And this time I would like you to find something in your space that connects you to an ancestor or to your heritage. And I'll set my timer for a minute. And when you're ready, when you found that object, you can bring it to the camera. So beautiful. And if you have already found your object, if you would like to type in the chat a little bit about why you chose what you chose, please feel free. So what you chose and how it connects you to an ancestor or your heritage.
That ancestor is part of this.
Oh, Sarah's bat mitzvah picture.
Raya said hi back to me, to us.
I could bring my father's face in here.
That would be a little difficult.
Juba. Mm-hmm.
but that's the right idea.
In this space, or something, this space.
I painted this for my nursery when it's lovely. And as people are putting their answers in the chat, these are great. And these are much more varied responses than, for example, something soft or even something that makes me smile. I wonder if there's anybody who's willing to share a little bit more about what they chose with the whole group by unmuting themselves. So if you have your object and you're willing to share a little bit about what you picked, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. Maybe tell us the story of that object or why you picked it. Sure.
I had a family picture of when we had Dave's brother's bar mitzvah, and all of his grandparents were alive at that time and since passed away.
Thank you for sharing that. That's lovely and a good memory too. Is there anybody else that would like to share? You can just unmute yourself.
I picked a whirling dervish. My father's from Turkey, and we have a number of things from Turkey and also from Norway, which is where my mother was from, in our house that we had to clear out after my parents had passed away. So we had them and trying to find places to display them in the house. Great. It's nice to have those memories of my parents' heritage.
Yeah, it's a great memory, and also it connects you to where they're from. I think we have time for just one more if there's one last person who'd like to share. You can also read in the chat what other people have done.
I have to have a kimchi. It's hard to change your appetite after you grow up in certain culture.
I love kimchi. Great. So an item of food can also bring a memory, and it also can bring a connection. Fantastic. And I see, Karen, you've got something and you're unmuted, so go for it.
This is a sculpture that my father made. He didn't have many objects in my home that he made. And so I get to look at it every day.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's a great one.
Great. So hopefully you can see how this activity can scaffold both feeling comfortable sharing, comfortable connecting with something about your identity, and connecting to each other. So I want to open it up to ask, and you can either unmute yourself or answer in the chat, if anything from the two activities that we did surprised you today. So if something surprised you or an observation. It can be from either activity.
Yes, hi everyone. Something that I realized that we still have in some way something in common. So, and that's really fascinating and amazing that we all have, a lot in common than our differences.
Yeah, more in common than our differences. That surprises me every time I do the wind blows activity. Anything else surprise anyone?
Just curious for Pingchun Company. The Pakistan show was really interesting and moving. What other culture have you hosted for such a show?
Thank you for that. I'm going to make that our first question when we move into the Q&A. I think Joanne wants to sort of circle around the specific activities and responses to them, but I'm going to put a pin in that. And as soon as we start the Q&A, I'll make that the first question, okay?
Yep.
Thanks, Sarah. Maybe another question I have is, did you learn something new from either of the activities? Is there anything you learned? You can type in the chat or take yourself a minute. Just learned where Sinan's family is from. Yeah, so you can learn something about a colleague or a friend that maybe you've even known for a while, something that you never thought to ask. I think that's a great point. and a great goal of working with an ensemble or a company.
Something that I learned, I never knew that I worked with Sarah Calusa 5 years, but I never knew that she was born in Bethesda, which currently I'm living I'm only 1 hour away from it. So because I live in Virginia, so that's really amazing.
Fantastic. So you learned something you have in common. And we'll take one more before we transition to questions. Is there anybody else who has something that they learned?
Well, I'm in a space that I spend a lot of time in the front room of our house, and it never realized how packed it was with things that are like memories and that are important to me. You know, I have things all around me, but I don't take much time to notice each one.
That's a great point. I participated in this game that a colleague led and had a very similar reaction. And it's amazing how quick everybody was at the game in terms of quickly noticing something new. So it's a great way to also learn about not just your colleague, but yourself. Fantastic. And I see some other answers in the chat. We learned that Aina is from Russia. Yeah, so you're discovering something new about somebody that maybe you've been in this adult learning community with for a while, but didn't know that. Fantastic. So I think now we're at a good spot to open it up for questions. It can be questions about our projects specifically, questions about doing theater with communities, or questions about the process and the games that we just did.
Great. And I said that I would put a pin in that question. So we'll start with that, which was, you know, for Ping Chong and Company, what are some of the other cultures and communities that we've worked with? And it's an interesting question because the format of Undesirable Elements, you know, really lends itself to any kind of group or experience. And so when Ping first created this project, this series of works in the early 90s, the first one was made in 1992. At that time, the way it was organized was really everyone came from a different background and only shared something in common, like they happened to live in Bethesda or they happened to live in Milwaukee, but their sort of cultural backgrounds were all different. And then since then, the piece has evolved often in conversation with our partner organizations to sometimes look at communities that all are sharing one cultural identity, but then within that, what are the differences and commonalities that they have within that community. So some recent examples, the last show that I did and the last time I was in a theater before we shut down for the pandemic was last year in March in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we made a show with the Hmong American community of St. Paul in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. So there's an extremely large Hmong refugee community, now second, third generation in the St. Paul area. And so that was a piece where everyone in that show were all Hmong American. We've made pieces where everyone was Congolese from what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, living in Syracuse. We did a show in Pittsburgh with all Black women in Pittsburgh. It's less common that we do shows where everyone shares one cultural identity. It's more common, like in Beyond Sacred, which you saw, and Firdaus can speak a little bit about, in Beyond Sacred, everyone was Muslim, but their cultural backgrounds were very different. So we had Firdaus from Afghanistan, we had Amir, who's half Egyptian and half Puerto Rican, we had Maha, whose family is from Pakistan, Kadeen, who's Black from family from the American South, Tiffany, whose family is from Trinidad, of Muslim descent. And so, some of these pieces also look at the assumptions that we make about, for example, a lot of Americans assume that all Muslims are Arab and all Arabs are Muslim, but that's not necessarily true. So a lot of different cultural communities and groups. And right now I'm working on a piece in New York City with not all, but primarily Black teenagers in New York talking about this last year, COVID, uprisings for racial justice in the election and what the specific experience has been for Black teens in New York. Thank you for that question. That's a great way to kick off our Q&A time. And actually, before we move on to more questions, I just wanted to allow Firdaus to introduce himself in person. Like Firdaus said, we've been working together for 6 years now. And I'm looking at the video and like, oh, there's little young Firdaus, and now he's all grown up. And Firdaus now lives in Virginia with his family, but we met in New York. So Firdaus, do you want to just introduce yourself and let us know where you're zooming in from right now?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much. I'm very delighted to be part of this. Thanks, Sarah and Joanne, for having this amazing and great show. I am currently, as Sarah mentioned, living in Virginia. Woodbridge, Virginia, and it's snowing actually. It's a beautiful snowy day, so I don't know if you guys have snow as well or not. But yeah, it's been close to 3 years. I used to live in New York City, but it's been like 3 years that my family moved down to Virginia. And it's amazing. I'm looking forward. You saw a brief introductory video about the show that I was part of. I was one of the 5 cast members that were doing the show, The Beyond Sacred Voices of Muslim Identity, which was part of the Undesirable Elements series that Sarah talked about it. So I'm looking forward if you guys have any questions about my experience.
Thank you, Firdaus. Yeah, so with that, we'll open it up. Questions for Firdaus, questions for Joanne about Oyame or the other programs at Imagination Stage that are ongoing right now. All of us are doing all this work in the pandemic, in the shutdown. We're still working with community members. I see a question in the chat. What have your organizations been doing during the past year? Yes, exactly. Since presumably there haven't been any in-person performances. Exactly right. Joanne, do you want to speak a little bit about what's going on at Imagination Stage?
Sure. So we do continue to do workshops online. So we work with a variety of groups using Zoom, or if it's through DC Public Schools, they use Microsoft Teams. But we are doing essentially similar work. There's some advantages with working in this way with young people, actually starting online. So for example, I have found that we did a series with students from Anacostia High School and a group of cadets, which are young people between the ages of 18 and 22 that are enrolled in UDC, but also on the path of becoming officers with MPD. And I found that the students especially were much more open because we were on Zoom. So they were the chat provided a great way to connect and to share their thoughts with a little bit less risk than when they're in person. So I think there have been actually some advantages for us. We are working digitally. So for our play 10 Seconds, which has come out of our work with young people and officers and shows different points of views on community building, that piece, rather than starting as a stage production, will start as a film. So it's a play script, but it's utilizing the advantages of film, and we'll do digital showings with different high schools and then do a Zoom instead of a live interactive workshop right after with the audience. It's a Zoom workshop. So similar. And then for Imagination Stage, our professional main stage, like a lot of theater for young audiences, we're filming the shows and then doing virtual field trips for schools.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
How long have you worked at Imagination Stage?
I've worked at Imagination Stage for 7 years.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to ask you if you knew one of the teachers there, but I guess you wouldn't know her because she may have been there before you've been there. But I used to take classes at Imagination Stage before it was where it was now. It was in Bethesda. It was on Whittier Boulevard. And by then it was called Bethesda Academy of Performing Arts, before it was called Imagination Stage, BAPA. And I was taking classes there. And I knew a teacher there that was really good. She worked with people with disabilities. She was pretty good. And I was going to ask you if you knew her. But
what was her name?
Sally Bailey.
I do know Sally Bailey.
Oh, you know her?
Yeah, I'm an alumni from Imagination Stage.
Oh, cool.
Or from BAPA.
Oregon. She moved to Oregon, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Is she still there?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
I remember when Imagination Stage was in White Flint. So, all of those things are gone now. And to answer the question about, how we're adapting online, similar to what Joanne said, Ping Chong and Company doesn't have its own theater. Everything we do is hosted by a theater with a physical space. So we're always in collaboration with other spaces. So we really can't go back to live performances until the theaters open again. But we are doing our work digitally. We have school programs that are happening remotely as well, on Zoom and Google Meets with our New York City classrooms. And then this project that I just mentioned with the teens in New York City, it's entirely remote. I have a cast of 6 incredible teenagers that I haven't met, but we're meeting, twice a week on Zoom and doing interviews on Zoom. I think it's actually a little easier for the younger folks to do this remote theater online because they are already used to doing school online. It's a little harder, I think, in some of the adult programs. and for adult audiences to kind of adapt to this idea of theater online, because it's such a shift and it's really hard for me too. I mean, I think theaters are doing amazing work, but boy, do we all miss being together in a room. Other questions?
I have one for both of you. When you are performing live, what are the audiences like? Do they tend to be from the same community? Do you feel like you're reaching people who are beyond the community? Do you get surprising reactions?
Yeah, our goal is generally to reach beyond the community with the performances, but I will share that with Oyame specifically, and I think because the play is done in a bilingual fashion, the first year, like every time we would ask a school, the primary audience is generally schools, and then we do performances for educators or nonprofit leaders. But it was like every school we would go to, it immediately got booked up by the English as a second language teacher. And so what was happening is all students kind of had the experience of being a refugee or a recent immigrant. And while I think that was powerful for them to see their stories represented on stage, that wasn't the ultimate goal, and it wasn't necessarily educational. So we had to make a shift when we were marketing and talking with individual schools to make sure we were achieving a goal of having like more of the school community represented. Didn't mean so that when students would go back to the classroom, so for example, if a non-ESL class, but like a social studies class came to see the play after, what would happen is then it would spark discussion. It would also give students who had experienced a similar story to what they saw on stage, the leadership to be able to share more and open up more and take ownership with their peers, as opposed to, kind of performing stories for young people who already had experienced what they saw on stage.
Yeah, I'm gonna take that and then invite Firdaus to speak a little bit to what his experiences were with audiences. And then I see the question in the chat too, asking about different feedback from young people versus adults in the audiences. So, with Beyond Sacred specifically, because we toured it so much around the country, we really took it to a lot of different places. And one of the most common questions we got, again, primarily this was during 2016 to 2019, so right in the middle of the Trump administration, and I love saying that in the past tense. We would get a lot of questions from people saying like, oh, theater audiences are so liberal and progressive, and aren't you just preaching to the choir, and everyone who's come to see this show is already so enlightened? And my answer to that was really, the choir is not as converted as you think it is, and that, people in the audiences really still had to look at their own relationships and biases, and people were open enough to come, but question around sort of what work they're doing in our communities as well. So that was one question that we got a lot with Beyond Sacred specifically. Generally, I think that balance, like Joanne was speaking to, when we did the show with Congolese refugees or the show in the Hmong American community in Minnesota, the goal really is to get both audiences that are, seeing their own stories on stage, who may not typically have that opportunity to see their own story on stage, and your sort of more traditional theater going audience that may not usually see stories that are different from them on stage, and then having those people sit side by side in the theater and hopefully create some opportunity for those connections to happen. But I'd love to invite, and then just to speak to the question about young people too. I mean, the reactions from young audience members when they see themselves on stage is so huge. And I love the school shows, and I love those Q&As, especially when we do a show with young performers speaking to young audience members. That peer-to-peer exchange is really, really important. And we did a show a few years ago with all New York City teens, including a young trans teen, and the feedback from kids in the audience who were trans or gender nonconforming, being able to see that story represented from a peer on stage and have conversations that they might not yet be having with their family or their school environments was really affirming and empowering. Firdaus, I'd love to hear some of your experiences with audience feedback. And I know that we're about at time. I think we were told that if people want to stay on, I think we're happy to stay on for a few more minutes. If now is your time to head out, then thank you for being here. But I think Joanne and I are able to stay for a bit longer if people want to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, sure. Just to build on what you mentioned, Sarah, the experiences, with doing the show Beyond Sacred shows it's been amazing and very powerful. We did close to 70 shows, and we thousands of people watched our shows across the country. We have been to more than 20 states, so mostly not only colleges, universities, community colleges, but also like even to schools and the youngest people that we performed were middle school students, which was also very amazing because they were very curious and more excited, and they had a lot of questions and wanted to know more about our faith during the Q&As and our experience and all that. But same thing with the adult communities and other, all kind of different backgrounds and communities. They, I think for all of them, during the Q&A and also after that, when they would talk to me and talk to other cast members, I think it was very informative for them and something very touching and something that they could relate to and resonate with. Same thing with the young people, and we used to have like people who during the Q&A they would ask a question or comment that, yeah, oh, I'm from the same country that you guys, one of you, have been or immigrated from, or my parents or my grandparents are from there, or I live in this community or in this area that you guys are currently living or have moved. Because the show and our cast members, especially I think Tiffany and Amir, yeah, they have been to many different places, also Maha, and also me as well, since I moved from Afghanistan here. And then lived in New York City and now in Virginia. So yeah, a lot of engagement, a lot of enthusiasm, overall very powerful and positive.
Other questions?
I have a.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Just one thought that's coming to me is, there are heritage months. It's like, for example, right now it's a Black Heritage Month, and then May there's like Asian Heritage Month and Hispanic Heritage Month, and all those are coming up. Yeah, so I kind of thought that it might be nice that some of your company, theater company, can kind of feature Heritage Month related program and feature these kind of show or collaborate with some organization and do these kind of activities together. I think it would be very meaningful. So just some thought.
Thank you. And Rabbi Cohen, did you have a question as well?
Well, I just had a general question, which is just, I'm concerned about the whole theater industry. Like a year of not being in the theater is really, really tough. I mean, it's tough for you guys as actors and actresses, but just financially, is there from New York, is there efforts going on to be able to save it? I mean, are we going to be able to go back and go to the theater like we used to be able to, or is it like, one of those things that's going to take years to recover from?
I think it's both. Honestly, it is going to take years to recover, and also theater's not going anywhere. People have been making theater and telling stories for thousands and thousands of years, and theater people and artists are always going to create because they have to, and these stories need to be heard. New York City specifically, our economy is pretty decimated, and it's not just when can we safely open up the theaters, but when do we have the financial support coming back in. Having a new administration and democratic control makes a really big difference for the future of recovery funding. And so, you know, there is a lot of advocacy happening for this next round of recovery legislation to specifically include theaters, performing arts, and other cultural organizations. There's something called Save Our Stages. There's a second round of the PPP loans. New York State is actively starting to put resources and legislation in place to support the theater economy, because it's actually a really, really multi-billion-dollar part of New York State and New York City's economy. But I think it's much bigger than when can we all go and sit in a theater together safely, even with the vaccine. I think it's going to take a long time. And I'm sure Joanna's worried about this too, but one of my big fears is around arts education, because it's already so tenuous in terms of funding for arts in the schools. And so when we see our school budgets getting slashed, one of the first things that gets cut is arts education. And then I'll add, for me, you know, one of the things that is particularly concerning is for the small nonprofits, particularly the organizations of color and artists of color who have much less kind of structural support than the sort of large, the Kennedy Centers of the world. I'm not that worried about at the end of the day, but a lot of the really small, culturally specific organizations that didn't have a lot of you know, reserves or financial wiggle room. You know, theater's always living on a razor's edge financially. So I would definitely say for those of you who have means, like, make donations if you can. There's a lot of need out there, but also advocacy around the importance of the arts to our culture and society as being part of the policies of recovery from this pandemic, I think is really huge. And Joanna, I'd invite you to share any thoughts around that too.
Yeah, sure. I think Sarah's point is a good one. And, you know, it's a full-time job for someone to navigate the differences between some of the, there's a lot of government emergency funding right this minute. So, but it's very challenging to navigate. And that's a full-time job. So for some of the really smaller organizations, they may not, that don't have somebody 100% dedicated to grants, for example, that can be a big challenge. So I would think that's a great point. I think for us, we're really concerned about, like, not this year necessarily, because there is some emergency funding, but that won't be in place. And so we're really next year. So we're concerned about next year, you know, with ticket revenue. If you have to do social distancing, then you can't, you know, fill the seats. And then from an arts education perspective, yeah, we're very concerned. Because for one thing, as a theater for young audiences, we rely on field trips as a big part of that earned income. And I think it's unlikely that schools, even when students are back in person, will be doing field trips and mixing with other kids until there's really mass vaccination. So that's a big concern and something we're planning for. I think, again, having to shift and having to be really creative about means of delivery, albeit digital, different kinds of partnerships will help, but it is concerning. And we do see our, you know, we work a lot with Montgomery County public schools and DC public schools, and, you know, the budgets do get cut a decent amount. So we're all sort of figuring out how to best partner together and pool resources.
So Sarah and Joanne, I think that's a perfect segue to remind everyone that the Theater for Change program of Imagination Stage is our tzedakah for this week. And also in the highlights, there are links to both Ping Chong Theater in New York and Imagination Stage. And so by all means, if you feel impelled to support this kind of theater, go for it.
Thank you. I think questions? I thought I saw one question, but maybe that was, I need to go now, goodbye. And so I think this is a good place to close. We've got a relatively, on my Zoom screen at least, I can see all of you at once right now. So I think just as a closing, I would love to invite everyone to kind of one at a time, unmute yourselves and share one word or phrase that is, you know, that you're taking away with you from this session, anything that resonated with you, or you can put it in the chat as we kind of say goodbye. But if there's, you know, a word, a phrase, an image out of the activities or presentations that Joanna and I shared with you, then we'd love to kind of hear those as your final closings. And it doesn't need to be a big speech. It can just be a word or a phrase as you say goodbye. Thank you. Inspiring, hope, community.
That's exciting.
Fun.
Great.
Looks
Looking different,
different.
but having things in common.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll send her a note later with me.
Yes, creativity in the face of obstacles. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank both of you and Ferdu as well for joining us and giving us a window into something that many of us were not aware of, or at least the extent to which the arts can really have an impact. I think this is, for our society today, we all need to find ways to have an impact, and this is certainly an important one. So thank you very much. And our participants, thank you. Enjoy the snow.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Nice to meet everyone.
Yes, thank you. Hope to
Bye-bye.
see you in the theater soon.
Hopefully.
Bye.